Since last 2 years, we are meeting every week on Wednesdays and Fridays for Wednesday Wisdom webinar and Friday Fundamentals, and discussing various aspects of management, new things, leadership, and many more. Today, we have with us a very important topic for discussion, and you may remember that the Honorable Minister Shri Nitin Gadkari in our program has mentioned about the fuel and the development that India needs to go for. I think taking for the clue from there, today we have with us Mr. Sunetra Sen, who is going to talk on importance and impact of biofuel, ethanol, and digitization opportunities in its supply chain. Mr. Sen has close to 18 years of business and technology consulting experience with TCS, Capgemini, Accenture, and Wipro. He is currently working as a business analyst, architect, and lead consultant with TCS in its India Energy and Resources division. Sunetra is proficient in the areas of management consulting, business analysis, solutioning, and process consulting, and has worked in energy and resources sector for more than 12 years. Sunetra has experience of working with clients from multiple geographies, including India, the UK, and Australia. He has worked on multiple opportunities in the area of digital transformation, leveraging technologies around automation, analytics, IoT, and extended reality. He is a bachelor of engineering from Regional Engineering College, Durgapur, and an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow. We welcome Mr. Sen, along with all the past presidents, my colleagues on EC, and all the members who are present in this particular webinar. So welcome all once again, and over to you, Mr. Sen.
Thank you, Kavita ma'am. Thank you. That was a very nice, introduction, and I also want to say good evening to the audience and all the members of the Bombay Management Association. We'll start with the presentation without further ado. I'll just share my screen so that the presentation slides are visible. And once you confirm, Kavita ma'am and rest of the audience, once you confirm that the slide is visible, I can start.
We can see the screen, yes.
Sure. So as Kavita ma'am mentioned, we will discuss about the importance and impact of biofuel, especially bioethanol, and the digitalization opportunities in its supply chain. So bioethanol, as ma'am mentioned about Mr. Gadkari, and through DTIO, we have been hearing it. Many of us might have heard it in the news over the past several months. Policy directives have also come out. And there has been an overall focus on net zero, which has also been spelled out very clearly by Prime Minister Modi earlier this year. So India wants to be net zero by 2070. So in this regard, all of us are aware to some extent that transportation sector is one of the largest consumers of energy. It has a very high, reliance on fossil fuel, petroleum, diesel, etc. And that is where there is an opportunity to, blend petroleum or gasoline, as it is called, with biofuel or bioethanol to reduce the overall, impact that is there on the ecology and environment. So the way we will look at this entire session is that we'll start with some background to what exactly bioethanol is, a very quick view of what other trends globally, and then we'll jump into more of the sources from which bioethanol is derived. What are the, briefly touch upon what are the policies that India is currently pursuing, and what kind of impact bioethanol has. So we all probably have at least a vague idea about the sustainability impacts that bioethanol has, but also from a socio-economic perspective, what are the impacts and effects of bioethanol adoption in the ecosystem. So we'll go through all of that, and then we'll see why digitalization is important, and what are the different ways in which digital technology can be introduced into the supply chain of bioethanol. Uh, Towards the end, what I have done is I have picked up a couple of case studies. These are live cases that I have worked on in the past 12 months or so with different organizations which sit at various parts of the bioethanol supply chain, and we'll see some of these digital interventions in action. So instead of talking about possibilities of digital technologies from a theoretical aspect, we'll see actual digital adoption that has been going on through a couple of live case studies. So we'll start with the background. Uh, what is bioethanol and how does it come into the picture in terms of blending with gasoline? So bioethanol is basically the chemical formula. If you see, let me just pull out the laser pointer. So it's a clear and colorless liquid with the chemical formula of CS3 CH2OH. It is a renewable fuel which is mostly made out of biomass. So when we say biomass, it could be something like a corn, it could be sugarcane, it could be wood, it could be grass. There are other feedstocks from which bioethanol can be manufactured, and which is something which we'll look in some more detail in subsequent slide. Uh, but the key thing is that irrespective of the source, whether we get it from sugarcane, from wood, or from algae, the chemical formula of bioethanol or ethanol is the same. And from the perspective of blending into gasoline or petrol, if you see towards the right of the screen, a very important concept is about the octane number. So octane number is basically what tells us about the anti-knocking properties of the fuel. Uh, and it is important because it tells us how what is the tendency of the fuel to burn in a controlled manner, right? So when the fuel gets when a particular fuel gets compressed in an internal combustion engine, how much of that compression can it tolerate before auto ignition, which is extremely important for internal combustion engines. And higher the octane number, the better it is. So if you see here, we see that gasoline or pure petrol has a octane number of 85, whereas ethanol has an octane number of 113. So, which means that when we blend ethanol with gasoline, the overall octane number of the mixture goes up. So, I've tried to illustrate this through one image here at the top. This is from a petrol or gasoline station in the US, and if you see that they are trying to retail, gasoline with different octane numbers, and if this is visible to the audience, you can see that the price or the retail price also goes up from $2.65 to $2.95 as the octane number goes up. So it is an octane enhancer, the bioethanol. And if you see, there are different grades of bioethanol like E15, E85, where the let me pick out the pen. If you see E15, where the octane number goes up to 88, and then for E85 it goes up to 108. Uh, One thing we should keep in mind is that ethanol has a lower energy density or lower calorific value than pure gasoline. So pure ethanol or denatured ethanol, which is 90%, 98% ethanol, has 30% less energy than gasoline per gallon. So which also means that as the amount of ethanol which is blended into petrol goes up, the net calorific value of the mixture comes down. So that will also have a bearing on certain policy aspects and adoption aspects, which we will see in the subsequent slides. I just want to take a minute to kind of introduce this notation of E15 or E85. These are notations which are industry standards. What it basically signifies is the amount of ethanol in the mixture on a volume by volume basis. So when I say E15, it basically means that the mixture contains 15% ethanol and the rest gasoline. And E85 is when it contains 85% ethanol and the rest gasoline. So these are the standard notations which we follow and which are extensively used in the industry as well from a policy framing perspective. Um, Now, if you come to the lower section of this slide, what I've tried to show is, in terms of adoption of ethanol, what is the kind of impact it has, firstly on the automobile manufacturers, and secondly on the oil marketing companies, right? So for the automobile manufacturers, if we see the kind of engines that we have in the two-wheelers and four-wheelers as of date, uh, E5, which is 5% blend of ethanol, and E10, which is a 10% blend of ethanol, this is mostly compatible with uh, the current engines which we have in the market. But any higher grade of ethanol, if we talk about E20, if we talk about E85, or even if we talk about something like E15, uh, will not be compatible with the current grades of engines because of certain detrimental impacts, corrosion, etc. So various engine parts which are made of low carbon steel, or the aluminum parts, the metal parts, are susceptible to a lot of corrosion from ethanol, which also means that uh, you know uh, blended ethanol, especially when it goes beyond E10, we'll also need certain adaptations which need to be incorporated by the automobile manufacturers. In fact, when we go up to a very high blend of ethanol around E85, E100, the ordinary normal engines will not work anymore, and we'll have to go for something called as the flex engines, which are differently designed altogether. The engine design of flex engines is very different from the ordinary or normally used automobile engines. And obviously there is a cost aspect. There's a lot of research and development that the automobile companies will have to invest in. The parts will also be costlier, and overall cost of ownership of the vehicles will also go up significantly. A second point which we should note is that, as we mentioned, the calorific value being less, uh, there will be a 6% drop in fuel efficiency. This is as per one of the studies by the Automobile Association of India. When we adopt E20 as a logical progression, today if we are at E5 or E10 and we want to move to E20, there'll be a 6% drop in fuel efficiency, which means that the design of the engines have also got to be recalibrated to adjust for this drop in efficiency. Now, this is from the automobile manufacturers' perspective. From the fuel retailers or the oil marketing companies, whether it is IOCL, BPCL, etc., their impact is not that much, because they are already used to doping fuel with ethanol. We have E10, which is 10% blend of ethanol, fairly widely available in the country as we speak today, and we'll also see that in one of the later slides. So they are used to this, and one of the advantages is that this doping or mixing of ethanol with gasoline is not done at the refinery, but it is done at the downstream storage site. So the refinery processes or the refinery plant itself is not getting impacted. However, there is one area which needs to be considered, and it has been one of the experiences coming out of the US, where a lot of corn-based ethanol is manufactured, and also Brazil, where a lot of ethanol adoption has been taking place over the past 6-7 years, is that some of these storage sites, which are again has a lot of metals in aluminum or steel based storage tanks, and these are also susceptible to corrosion because of the storage of ethanol before it is actually blended with the gasoline, or even if directly the blended gasoline, if the proportion of ethanol is on the higher side. So there, the OMCs also will probably need to see how best they can take care of that. They will probably need to invest in some other kind of corrosion resistant additives into the gasoline ethanol mixtures to prevent such things from happening. So this slide set the background. If there are any questions from the audience, I can take a pause now, or
we can continue. We will have questions at the end, as well as
okay.
people. I will request all the participants, if they have any question, they can put it in chat box, and then we can take it from there also.
Sure. So we'll go quickly to the next slide and spend just a couple of minutes to see how
We are unable to hear you.
to blend a minimum percentage with gasoline. Second, for production of the feedstock in corn. Hello, are you able to hear me now? Hello.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. So, so as I was saying, there are three main factors which are, which promotes the production and adoption of ethanol. The first is demand enrichment, where there are government mandates to say that there is a minimum blend of ethanol with gasoline which is required. Uh, so it could be that the particular government has mandated 10% ethanol blending, 20% ethanol blending, and so on and so forth. Second is the supply enrichment, where the government encourages the production from different feedstocks. So whether it is food-based feedstocks like sugarcane, corn, etc., whether it is algae-based or agricultural waste-based. So there are different schemes which the governments can run to encourage adoption of feedstocks for ethanol production. And thirdly, different incentives, tax benefits and other financial incentives which the government might have. And why this is important is because we will see all these three factors playing in India right now in terms of the policies which the government of India has floated in the recent past to promote the use of bioethanol along with gasoline. And what we see from our experience across the globe is, in Brazil, for example, currently they are already at a 27% blend of ethanol. So which means Brazil is using E27. Okay, and the E27 gets used mainly by the two-wheelers, and there is a fairly decent proportion of flex vehicles which are also available in Brazil. But in most of the other countries, if you see the US, China, Thailand, it's primarily the normal vehicles, the normal automobile vehicles which are there in operation. US, there is a small proportion of flex fuel vehicles for higher blends of ethanol. But mostly, if we see, primarily normal vehicles are still being used. So which means that adoption of vehicles which can support higher blend of ethanol is probably not that straightforward and simple, and there has to be a lot of R&D and investments done from the automobile companies to achieve this. From a ethanol blending perspective, we see that apart from Brazil, if we look at EU, the target is 10%. In China, the target is 10%. Thailand has set a target of 7% in 2015. and they want to increase it to 25% by 2036. So which is a fairly long time interval from now, or from 2015 to 2036. So we'll see how this compares what we have in India right now and the direction that we are going to take, which is going to be fairly aggressive as compared to most of these other countries across the globe. So before getting into the scenario in India, we'll spend a little bit of time on the different sources of ethanol that I have been mentioning. Uh, so what we have, we call it the first generation, second generation, third generation, and fourth generation ethanol refineries. So the first generation refineries are mostly those where the feedstock is coming from edible biomass, right? Let me get the pointer. So the feedstock is coming from edible biomass. So the edible biomass could be sugarcane, uh, which is one of the primary sources of bioethanol in India. It could be wheat, it could be corn. Corn is very prevalent in the US and Brazil. So this has its own, demerits as well, which we'll see in a subsequent slide. The second generation uh, uh, refineries, as they are called, is coming from non-edible biomass. It could be wood, it could be bamboo. One of the case studies that I talked about and we'll discuss subsequently is actually a bamboo-based ethanol, bioethanol refinery. It could also come from straw or agricultural waste. So obviously, there are advantages to 2G, bioethanol refineries, because the feedstock being non-edible mass, it doesn't hurt food security. Agricultural waste, we all know it's produced, in plenty in our country. There's a lot of stubble burning. We have heard the stories of pollution in Delhi during the winter months, and so on and so forth. So all of that could be using available technology, be used as feedstock for generation of or production of bioethanol. So these two, the 1G refineries or 1G technologies from edible biomass and the 2G technologies from non-edible biomass are basically what is mostly in vogue today as we speak. Most of the refineries in India are 1G. There is a renewed focus on 2G also, uh, which we will discuss, and the reasons behind that. But these two primarily make up the entire, set of refineries from the perspective of bioethanol production in India and also globally. Uh, there are third generation technologies which is based on algae biomass, macro algae, which is basically seaweed and microalgae. But these are still not, extremely commercially viable. The economic feasibility of these technologies need to be assessed. And then fourth generation technology is using, advanced tech like pyrolysis or engineered algae. These are things which are still under R&D and a few years away from commercial adoption, at least. Uh, so if we look at the table at the bottom, this kind of is a good summary of how first and second generation technologies compare. So if you see the first factor that is there, whether it competes with food sources or not. So by definition, first generation feedstock is coming from edible biomass. So it's a negative, right? So first generation refineries is competing with food sources, right? Does not compete with land resources, again because it comes from food sources. The corn, the sugarcane needs to be grown somewhere, land is required, so it also competes with the land resources. And from a carbon negative perspective, although the ethanol itself has a extremely good impact on from a pollution and sustainability perspective, but if we look at the lifetime CO2 generation, right from the growing and harvesting of the feedstock to the final, consumption as bioethanol, it's still not carbon positive. So first generation refineries, although the feedstock may be more widely available, but overall, from a carbon negative perspective, we are still not there with this. Second generation refineries do not compete with food sources, which is, by definition, non-edible biomass, wood, grass, etc., which is not competing with food sources. However, we still need, land to cultivate the bamboo or the grass, etc. So it still has land requirements. And from a carbon negativity perspective, uh, the second generation refineries are basically carbon neutral. So that's one of the biggest advantage of second generation refineries. And also in a country like India, where food availability sometimes can be on the, there can be food shortages and so on and so forth. So the fact that the second generation refineries do not compete with food sources is also a big plus. So obviously, from this table, it seems that second generation refineries or second generation technologies to produce ethanol is where the focus should be. And there are many experts and committees who have recommended adoption of second generation refineries. But of course, it comes with its own costs. Whereas, the first generation refineries can take around 100 to 200 crores for or of capex for the refineries to be set up. The second generation refineries could take maybe 1,000 crores or more, so almost a factor of 5 there. So there's a huge capex involvement there. And of course, we'll see how the policy has also been tuned by the government to encourage, setting up of second generation refineries in spite of the large additional capex requirement because of these advantages otherwise, right? Um, we'll then spend a few minutes on India's energy outlook. So I think without getting into very specifics, the key takeaways from this part of the slide is that the GDP of India is growing. Yes, there was a little bit of a shock because of COVID, but more or less now we are back on track, and the expectation is that this year will grow at 9.5%, next year 8.25%, and then like with any large country organization, the rate of growth itself might slow down a little bit, but will probably stabilize somewhere around 6% as per Statista. And these figures can, of course, change, based on how fast we recover from the pandemic and other such factors. Uh, so with the expanding GDP and a growing population, India is also going to see a lot of urbanization. The International Energy Agency is predicting 275 million additional urban population by 2040. That's a huge number, 275 million in next 20 years of additional urban population. And then, of course, evolving lifestyles, rising spending power, all of this will contribute to the overall energy demand. And a large chunk of that energy demand will also translate into energy demand or fuel requirement for the transportation sector. So as we speak today, 98% of the transportation sector fuel is made by fossil fuel. So that's a huge, almost the entire transportation sector fuel requirements are coming from fossil fuel, like petrol, diesel, etc., that we are aware of. And this is almost expected to double in the next couple of decades. Uh, Alongside that, as you might have heard Mr. Gadkari and others mention very often, 85% of India's requirements, oil requirements, are imported. So that's a huge number. So for the transportation sector, basically, uh, practically we are dependent to a large extent on imported oil. So that is where this blending of ethanol, blending of bioethanol can play a very important role, because we are talking about 20%, with say a E20 blend of bioethanol, we are talking about 20% of the overall volume being met through non-crude oil, non-import sources. Uh, this 20% could eventually go up. Technologically, it is possible, although it is not that easy, but it's possible to have E85 and E100 powered vehicles as well, one example I saw in Karnataka, the state buses are running completely on biodiesel. Karnataka has actually taken a lead in terms of biodiesel production. So all their state-run buses, or KSRTC buses, are running on biodiesel. So that's a huge, impact in terms of the effect on the environment and pollution control, etc. So if you see here on the left hand side, this is a both these graphs actually are predictions from the International Energy Association. This was done last year, so it's around, these data points are around 12 to 15 months old. But if we see here, a major chunk of the oil that comes in as input in 2040 still goes into fossil fuel generation, right? Only a very narrow, if you see at the bottom, a very narrow, thin red line actually goes for electricity generation. And out of that, if you see the fossil fuel, which is generated from oil, natural gas to a lower extent, and coal, the second biggest consumption happens in transportation. So that, again tells you the importance of oil to the transportation sector that we just discussed, not only today, but also a couple of decades from now. And the other graph, which again, just to illustrate the importance of ethanol adoption and technology uh, improvements in this area, if we look at the passenger car sales compared between 2019 and 2040, so the IEA has taken two different scenarios. One is what they're calling steps, or the stated policy scenario. So this is basically the scenario where India grows basis the stated policies as of last year. And then this IVC, or the India vision case, where India fully realizes some of the energy related objectives and policies which have been stated but may not have been formulated as concrete policies yet. So while the intricacies of the scenarios are not maybe very relevant to today's discussion, what is important to see is that in either cases, the firstly, the sales of passenger car vehicles is going up, from around 2 million or so from in 2019 to almost around 10 or 12 million in 2040. So that's almost a 5x jump in the next couple of decades. And in these scenarios also, if we see a major proportion, maybe around 70% in this case and 50% in this case, a major proportion of the passenger cars are still going to be powered by petroleum internal combustion engines. So although there is a lot of talk about electric vehicles, EVs, hybrid EVs, which obviously will also come in the picture, and there might be rapid adoption of EVs at certain point of time, and this scenario or this picture could look a little different, but petroleum based ICE engines are here to stay for the next few decades. And so that also undermines the importance of bioethanol blending in the overall scenario going forward. And then finally, if we look at the policy stance which India has taken, um, so from a feedstock perspective, uh, we discussed that there are different feedstocks which categorizes the bioethanol refineries, first generation, second generation, etc. So the government is encouraging development of new feedstocks. So there are investments being made to see if 3G, 4G technologies can be made more viable and adoption can increase. And the National Biofuels Coordination Committee has also been established, and they are proposing to come up with a national biomass repository. So across the India, surveys will be carried out to see what kind of biomass is available in each part of the country, what are the seasonal availability of different biomasses. So according to that, the refinery locations can be set up. Transportation of bioethanol, there will be areas in India which will be surplus in bioethanol, other states or other regions which will be deficit in bioethanol because this is not available throughout the country in the same proportion, the feedstocks. And so transportation of bioethanol or the feedstocks is also going to be an important factor to be considered. From a financial, so this is basically the first factor that we discussed globally also, demand from a demand perspective. From an incentive perspective, national biofuel fund is proposed, although this is still something which is work in progress. It has not been concretized yet. But for advanced biofuels, like 2G ethanol, the government is giving certain tax credits, viability gap funding. So as we were discussing, the initial capex for setting up a 2G refinery would be almost 5 times that of a 1G refinery. So there could be a viability gap, and the government has allocated around 5,000 crore rupees for viability gap funding over the next 6 years or so. So that's a very concrete, step taken by the government to promote 2G because of its advantages over 1G technology. Also, the prices, which of 2G ethanol, which is to be determined by the Biofuel Coordination Committee. So government has clearly mandated that 2G ethanol will be bought at a higher price versus 1G ethanol, and that also incentivizes the producers to invest in 2G refineries. From an export-import perspective, the current policy is very very simple, I would say. Import and export of biofuels is not permitted. So right now we are looking at production of biofuel, bioethanol, and we are looking at consumption of that within the country itself. And of course, from a quality and marketing perspective, the government is also promoting different test methods, procedures. The OMCs are also looking into that. If you see this, there's a couple of recent newspaper clippings. The first one talks about 9% ethanol blending, which is already being achieved earlier this year in February, and the target of 20% blending or E20 by 2025. That's the stated policy objective. In terms of the incentives, if you see, apart from the central government, the state governments also are trying to encourage production and adoption of ethanol. So this is one example from Gujarat. This is from December. This is from December of 2021, so 2-3 months old, where the Gujarat state government is talking about capital subsidy of 25%, interest subsidy of 7%, 100% reimbursement of SGST and electricity duties. So a lot of schemes to incentivize investments into bioethanol production. And at the top, if you see this chart, looks a bit complex, but the key takeaways is that if you see the blending, which is currently at 10%, so this is 2021-22, so we are at E10 now. Almost 50% to 60% retail outlets in the country is already able to dispense E10 grade of blended petrol or blended gasoline. And the stated policy objective is to take it to 20% by 2025-26. So just to compare with what we saw in terms of the global scenario in 2 or 3 slides back, even some of the more developed nations in the EU, etc., China, which is looking only for E10 to be available. Thailand is looking for E25 to be available, but that is over a period of almost 20 years. But we are talking about moving from E10 to E20 in a matter of 5-6 years, right? So that's the policy objective. So it's a very aggressive policy objective, which means that there will be a lot of efforts made by the government to incentivize the production of bioethanol, and which also means that technology adoption, digitalization will play a very important part to catalyze the overall growth of this sector. right? So around 2025 is when we should have nationwide availability of E20, and also the rollout of E20 based vehicles. So as we mentioned or discussed in the first slide, E5 and E10 are compatible with the current grades of auto engines that are available in the market, but E20 compliant engines need to be separately designed and manufactured. Uh, uh, One point to be noted here is that these E20 engines will also need to be, kind of backwards compatible with E10, because E10 may not go away that fast, right? So once we have a fairly large proportion of E20 availability by 2025, it doesn't mean E10 disappears. E10 will probably still be there in parallel to E20 for the next 4 5 years before the entire availability of blended gasoline comes from E20. Uh, the other thing is, because a lot of the automobiles which are hitting the market, hitting the road right now, will continue to run for the next 10 15 years. E10 as a variant should also be available in the retail outlets. So the retail outlets dispensing E20 should also have provision to dispense E10. So it will be something like we saw in the first slide, the picture from US, where we have 2 or 3 different varieties of gasoline available. So which is also the case today, where we have on normal petrol, speed, etc., different varieties which are available from the same petrol pump. Right? So given that this is the policy stance, we looked at the energy scenario where a lot of petroleum-based engines will exist even in the future. Uh, and we saw how the central government and the state governments are encouraging the adoption of ethanol blended petrol, moving to E10, and also a very aggressive movement towards E20 in the next 3 4 5 years. So what are the impacts of bioethanol adoption? Clearly, the first big impact is from a sustainability perspective, in terms of arresting the pollution, in terms of having a positive impact on the environment, and providing a cleaner, greener, and safer option for us. So there are 5 main areas where bioethanol has excuse me has an impact from a sustainability perspective. The first is that it has a positive energy balance. So corn ethanol has 1.3 to 1.7 times the energy that is used to prepare or produce it. Now, these are all data points coming out of the US and Brazil, where a lot of research has been done, and where bioethanol in gasoline has been prevalent over the past more than a decade. Cellulosic ethanol, or 2G in a variety which comes from wood or bamboo, is even better, producing energy to the tune of 4 to 6%, 4 to 6 times uh, as compared to the energy which is used to produce it. So overall, it's a positive energy balance. Lower emissions, it is a cleaner fuel. So as we blend more and more ethanol into gasoline, the greenhouse gas emissions come down. So we see that it can be lower to the tune of 50% for corn-based ethanol, and sugarcane-based ethanol can take it to 78% almost. Cellulosic ethanol, 2G variety, can take it even further, up to 85 to 90%. So of course, these data points are all what we have got in the laboratories under standard conditions of testing. But more than the percentage, I think what is important is to understand that emissions are significantly lowered by adoption of bioethanol blended petrol. The third is that ethanol is biodegradable and it is non-toxic. Okay, so the immediate harmful effect, apart from greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of cancers, etc., which could be possible through the use of gasoline, that is also lowered to a large extent because of adoption of bioethanol. And finally, the additives which are used, so gasoline or petrol cannot be used as it is because the octane number is slightly on the lower side, around 85. It needs to be increased towards 90. So certain, fuel additives or octane enhancers like benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, xylene are traditionally used as additives to gasoline. So these are very toxic. This can produce a lot of detrimental health effects as well, apart from the greenhouse gas emissions of gasoline as such. So these toxic additives can be replaced with bioethanol, which is cleaner and which can also serve the purpose of octane enhancement because of its own octane number being on the higher side. So this is the kind of impact that bioethanol has on from a sustainability perspective. Uh, but beyond that, also from a socio-economic perspective, bioethanol has a lot of pluses. So it is seen to contribute significantly to employment generation. So the bioethanol refineries, will employ directly a lot of people, but also people who will be engaged in transportation of the feedstock, who will be engaged in transportation of the final product, the bioethanol to the refineries. All of them will be part of the ecosystem where which will contribute to employment generation. A second advantage would be additional income for the farmers. This is especially true for 2G refineries. A lot of agriculture waste, as I think we were discussing in a couple of slides back, which otherwise gets burned by the farmers, can be converted into ethanol. So, and then this can fetch a price, for the farmers for this waste, which normally gets burned and doesn't add to their overall income. Also, we know that a lot of this burning contributes to pollution, etc. So there's a double positive here. It adds to the income of the farmers, and at the same time, it also has a positive effect on the environment as such. From a energy security perspective, because as we saw, 85% of oil is currently being imported, so we are India as a country susceptible to the vagaries of the geopolitics of the world. We have seen that the recent Russia Ukraine situation might have certain impacts on the prices of domestic petrol and diesel. So from that energy security perspective also, uh, because bioethanol is entirely produced in-house in terms of in the country and consumed in the country. So from a self-sufficiency and security perspective also, it's a plus. And last but definitely not the least, reduce import dependency, and also helps in management of forex, which is all the more important today. And Niti Aayog says that a successful biofuels program can save India around $4 billion annually. So that's 30,000 crores annually. So which is also a big amount and a big positive coming out of bioethanol adoption. There are, as they say, every coin has two sides. There are certain negatives also. So the first thing is water scarcity. So as I was saying that because 1G technology, which comes from primarily edible biomass, is the most prevalent technology in the country today. The farmers may be incentivized to grow more of water intensive crops such as sugarcane and rice, because they are not only selling sugarcane and rice for traditional into the traditional markets, but they have a new altogether new market of bioethanol production opening up for them. And of course, food shortages, especially with 1G technologies, as I was saying, that is also a big negative if a lot of these food grains get diverted for energy production, especially in a country like India. So these are the pluses and minuses which need to be taken into account. And as we saw, the government is encouraging 2G technology for production of bioethanol. So 2G technology will, to a large extent, get rid of the water scarcity and food shortages problem, but it will still have these positives of employment generation or additional energy security and yeah, reduction of import dependencies. Uh, so having seen the importance of bioethanol, the different technologies that are currently available in the market for bioethanol production, if we talk about digitalization, then obviously the question is why digitalization? Sure, bioethanol is something which is here to stay. It has a lot of positive effects that we have seen. But how does digitalization, especially digitalization from the supply chain management perspective, come into the picture? So this is where we see that and if we see a study by the International Council of Clean Transportation, we see that if we look at the OPEX requirements for a typical bioethanol refinery, then a majority of it comes from the variable OPEX part. Fixed OPEX is stuff like labor or depreciation, etc., which is only around 15 to 25%, max 1/4 of the overall OPEX. But variable OPEX is really what is the bulk of the OPEX, and within the variable OPEX, we see that feedstocks can reach 50 to 80% of the total annual OPEX, right? So here, if we see this figure of 50 to 80%, then we kind of understand why streamlining the supply of feedstocks is all that important for all the bio refineries from a cost management perspective, right? So we need to keep in mind all the time that the ethanol which is made available at the retail pumps need to be cost effective, because we are talking about a drop in the calorific value. Uh, so if we need to burn a little more of bioethanol compared to ordinary gasoline, then the cost needs to be on the lower side. So from that perspective, one of my colleagues also did some analysis of a particular production plant in Rajasthan. So they have, this is a 1G bioethanol plant with a feedstock uh, of uh, of I think corn or something. And here again, if we see that the feedstock is 67%, so of the OPEX, so which is within this range. And so when we talk about streamlining the supply of feedstock, what are some of the things we can think about? We can think about transparent and optimized procurement. We think about quality monitoring of the feedstock, efficient transportation and logistics, and also high stakeholder satisfaction. So all of these can be areas which can be tackled through digitalization, different digital technologies which are available in the market today. So if we quickly jump on to the next slide, if we see from the R&D to getting the raw material, storage and transportation of the feedstock, processing of the feedstock, and then the transportation of the final product, which is the bioethanol, and customer service, there is a digital footprint across this supply chain, right? So whether it is Internet of Things, whether it is analytics, whether it is mobile applications, uh, ERP, all of these, and of course, last but not the least, cloud-based infrastructure, which can cut across the entire supply chain, hosting the different application, whether it is IoT application, ERP, or advanced analytic application. So we have footprint of digitalization across the supply chain of bioethanol. And what I would like to do is quickly jump into the case studies where we will see in action some of these elements around IoT, analytics, etc. And that will kind of give us an illustration of how the supply chain of bioethanol leverages these latest digital technology and how some of those objectives of transparency, optimization, etc., are being looked at. So, excuse me for a minute. So the first case study that we'll take up today is the supply chain for our 2G bioethanol refinery. So this is a refinery which is based in northeast of India. And if we look at the supply chain, it's a 2G refinery. So the feedstock here is wood. So as we know, abundantly available in the northeast. Uh, and how does the supply chain look like? How does this feedstock of bamboo get to the refinery where the bioethanol is finally produced, right? So there are bamboo growers spread across the northeast states with whom the refinery has long-term contracts, the farmers and farming communities. So from them, certain specific species of bamboo is collected and harvested, and it is transported to an interim unit which is outside the refinery, which is called the chippers. So chippers are basically who chip the pole bamboos into small pieces of chipped bamboos, and the chipped bamboo is what is actually fed into the refinery for production of bio ethanol. So if we see immediately in terms of if we try to relate with some of the advantages that we saw of bioethanol adoption, socio-economic impact, immediately we see that a lot of bamboo growers, thousands of bamboo growers across the northeastern states get a fresh new market altogether. Second is the harvesters, who are responsible for collection of the raw bamboo or pole bamboo, transportation to the chipping units. The chippers themselves are not, or the chipping units themselves are not part of the refinery. These are local people, local entrepreneurs who have set up the chipping units, maybe based on some loans which are provided by for the MSME sectors, or which are facilitated by the refinery. And then, so this also becomes an employment generating opportunity for the chippers, right? So we have bamboo growers, we have harvesters, we have chippers, and then the chipped bamboo, which needs to be transported over long distances from across different northeastern states into the refinery. So you also have local transporters who come into the picture, and who can make some money basically by providing their services. So there's this whole ecosystem in this particular case, and apart from the people directly employed by the refinery itself, we have this whole gamut of individuals who are providing different services, and thereby is a positive from an employment generation perspective. Right, so this is how the bamboo moves, the raw bamboo to the collected by the harvesters to the chipping units, where it is processed and chipped and then transferred into the refinery. So this is the supply chain at a very basic level. So of course, I have removed some of the more complexities which are there for today's discussion, and the entire flow of information is managed through this supply chain management system. So that is the ultimate goal. Uh, and from the perspective of usage of the supply chain management system, while the larger players, the refinery itself, and some of these chippers, but also large players, will be able to invest in personal computers to access the supply chain system. The small bamboo growers or harvesters may not have such access, and so that is where mobility will also play a very important part. So making the supply chain management system available through a mobile app uh, for these growers and harvesters with local language support, so that they can track how much bamboo they have supplied to the chippers. They can get paid by the refineries based on the quality and species of bamboo that has been supplied. The harvesters can maybe raise a payment request against the transportation and harvesting services they have provided. Similarly, the transporters can check, the route which has been planned by the refinery to get the chipped bamboos from a particular chipping unit to the refinery. The trucks or vehicles are GPS enabled. So that's again another example of digital playing an important part. So the refinery is aware of the ETA of the different trucks and vehicles which are coming in with the chipped bamboo. So they know how to plan their inventory on their side. So all of this gets facilitated with the mobile app version of the supply chain management system. So having looked at the supply chain from a slightly high level, also let us look at the in different elements which get into the supply chain. So the first thing we see uh, is that the supply chain itself is composed of different modules, and the overall supply chain system is integrated with their ERP. So as we saw the digital footprints, ERP is one of the key areas of digitalization. The second being the instrumentation, right? So there are different instruments and IoT devices which come into the picture from a supply chain perspective. So the supply of bamboo has to be totally transparent for stakeholder happiness, right? The stakeholder should know through the mobile app that he or she has supplied so many tons of bamboo. This is the such and such species. This is the moisture content of the bamboo. All of which will also play a part in how the bamboo finally gets chipped and the extraction of ethanol from that. So at the point of harvest, there are sensors and devices like weight meters to capture the weight of the bamboo, the moisture meters, and all of this data is getting captured through the meters and then getting stored in the central supply chain management system. So at any point of time, if there is a dispute, if a farmer feels or wants to check the quality and quantity of bamboo which was supplied by him or her, then it is just a mobile phone away, right? So they can always log into their app and check uh, what they had supplied and what payment they had received from the refinery as a result of that supply. So there are smart cards which are available. These are given out to all the stakeholders as registration cards. So all the harvesters or transporters or farmers will have smart cards using which their payments can be processed. So the smart cards will give you a unique identity, a unique number against which bank accounts are mapped, and then through the bank payment gateways, the payments are automatically made by the refinery. So there is no dependency of intermediaries. It is not that the refinery has to pay the harvester and the harvester will in turn go and pay the farmer. Nothing like that. Everything is recorded on the systems based on the moisture, the weight, etc. Automatic calculation of the payment happens, and direct transfer of the payment from the refinery to the accounts of the farmers or harvesters is possible. We have other devices like barcode scanners, which the barcodes help us in tracking basically the batches of bamboos which come out of the farms, and it basically enables us to keep a track on what is the quality of that bamboo, what kind of chipped bamboo it is producing, what kind of bioethanol quality is coming out of of different species of bamboo. And what it means is that once it's like in say a couple of years, once we have enough data, the refinery is operational, and we have collected data on what type of bamboo species and what was the moisture content when it was harvested versus the quality of bioethanol that we got. We can have a predictive analytics based system which the refinery can use to understand, given the kind of bamboo that is available from the different farmers with whom they have contract, to see and plan their production for the future. Uh, uh, in addition to these IoT or instruments, there are other possibilities, going ahead, that we have studied. which obviously needs additional investment, but possibilities abound, in terms of smart cameras in the chipping units. There could be sensors which can be attached to the conveyor belts where the bamboos are actually chipped, so that any malfunction, any breakdown of the chipping units can get automatically notified to the refinery. So if a chipping unit goes down, the refinery knows that it will take so much time to come back live. So it can plan to satisfy its feedstock demand through some other chipping units, so on and so forth. And then this entire in this entire system, the supply chain system, along with the databases where the IoT data gets stored, the integration with third party systems, ERP, the entire thing is hosted on a cloud based infrastructure. So that is one example of how digital technologies, whether it is ERP, IoT, whether it is cloud, whether it is the automatic payments, whether it is the maps, or maybe a Google map or something for live tracking of the vehicles, how all of these come together and define a very robust and very transparent supply chain for this refinery. Uh, the second case study that we have taken up for today is the ethanol procurement system. So the first case study was talking about supply of feedstock to the refinery. The second one talks about supply of the bioethanol, which is produced in the different refineries, to the oil marketing companies, right? So the oil marketing companies have to source or procure the ethanol from different such bioethanol refineries. Many of them may not be extremely large refineries. And then, as we discussed in the initial slide, the ethanol gets stored in some downstream storage locations where the final mixing with gasoline takes place. Uh, as we saw that there is a clear mandate and a clear roadmap from the government to adopt bioethanol, and a very aggressive path to take it from E10 to E20 over the next 4 5 years. So for that, what is envisaged by the Indian oil marketing companies is to have a single window, a single platform using which they can procure this bioethanol from all the different bioethanol refineries across the country. So what is envisaged here is an integrated cloud-based management. So cloudification or cloud adoption, we are seeing increasingly seeing, is a very major component when we talk about digitalization of the supply chain. Uh, we will have this platform as a web application. We'll have an optimization engine. So this is a key element of advanced analytics, where the oil marketing companies basically want to procure the ethanol at the lowest cost possible, but given certain constraints, like there could be certain refineries which are down, there could be transportation which is not available. The refineries themselves will have their daily or annual capacities mentioned. So the overall procurement has to be optimized, and this will mean advanced mathematical techniques, like integer programming or mixed integer programming based modules to run the optimization and to present the demand satisfaction plan. And it will also obviously mean integration with other applications, which we also saw in the first case study. The system or the platform itself will have different functional modules, which we can take a look at in the next slide. So if we see in this case also, the vendors who need to register with the OMCs, the demand management and the letter of intent gets issued by the OMCs to the different vendors, saying or confirming basically the amount of bioethanol which is needed, and then the demand allocation and reallocation, which takes place through the advanced analytics module or optimization engine. We have several products today in terms of optimization engines. It could be standard COTS product. We have a lot of Python libraries which are available. So all these are building into the overall digital footprint. the the logistics and dispatch, again, tracking of the cargo or the bioethanol from these refineries to the storage locations of the OMCs. So the OMCs know the ETA and they can plan their production schedule accordingly. And then again, as I mentioned, cloud infrastructure. So this entire system is going to be hosted on a cloud-based platform, uh, 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 and be made available to all the OMCs and all the vendors, who are supplying, or all the refineries, rather, who are supplying bioethanol to the OMCs, so that there is absolute transparency. So basically, this case studies, kind of, I've tried to illustrate those 4 points which we discussed earlier in terms of the ethanol supply chain, which should be transparent. There should be absolute visibility for all the stakeholders across the supply chain, both from a feedstock as well as the end product perspective. There, it should be optimized in terms of the demand planning and the demand notifications which are sent, both in the first case where the demand is getting satisfied from the feedstock providers, and in the second case where the demand is being fulfilled by the refineries. The entire demand schedule is optimized using advanced analytics. Uh, and we have seen how IoT and cloud play a crucial part, in providing that transparency and hosting the overall solution. And last but not the least, we saw that this transparency is what will provide the kind of stakeholder satisfaction, which will, in addition to the various policy incentives, etc., create a very positive ecosystem of players, and hopefully, overall it will help in not only in cost management, but in also, additional players getting into this bioethanol space and investing. If we have to realistically meet that target of having E20 blend available throughout the country by 2025 or so. So I think this is where we end in terms of the slides that I had for today. I will hand it back to Kavita ma'am, and I'll request the audience if there are any questions or thoughts on this. I can take those now.
Yeah, thank you, Sunetra ji. That is really very exhaustive, and right from the chemical composition to actually how it can be achieved. It was a great journey that you have shown us. There are some questions in the chat box, but before we take that, I would like to know that how is India placed in this ethanol spectrum? Are we ahead of time or are we lagging behind as compared to our peers and our neighbors in the world?
Right. So as I was showing in one of the earlier slides, even some of the developed countries have a target of only E10. The entire European Union has a target of only getting to E10. China has a target of only getting to E10. Whereas India, we have achieved E10 this year, 2022, and we want to go to E20 in the next 3 or 4 years, by 2025, 2026. So in that sense, I think India is much ahead of the curve in terms of adoption of bioethanol as compared to China, US, and EU. And even Brazil and Thailand, which are big players in the bioethanol space, there, Thailand, for example, is planning to go to E25 only by 2036, which is almost 10 years after India is targeting adoption of E20. So I think India is at a position where we can be a trendsetter, of course keeping in mind some of the caveats, like water scarcity, food impact on food security, etc. And that is where I think a lot of focus should now shift to 2G technologies for bioethanol production.
Yeah, thank you. I will request the participants to keep the videos on so that we can take a photograph. And I have requested Samaksh Rao to unmute himself if he can do that. and ask its questions.
My question is then, how does the use of bioethanol fuel in automobiles contribute to the corrosion of the engine component?
Okay. So I'll not be able to give you the details of the chemistry as such. That's not something I which I fully appreciate. But the thing is that as the ethanol blending goes up, as we move from 5% to 10% to 20% and 85% blending of ethanol, it has a huge impact on the especially the metal parts of the engine, right? So the metal joints, the low carbon steel, the aluminum parts of the engine gets impacted. And there are certain research papers where in the lab they have seen that exposure of these metal parts to bioethanol over longish hours. They have studied these over say 500, 600 hours, 900 hours, and they have seen a complete corrosion and breakdown of the metal parts, which is obviously not acceptable. So in that sense, there are certain corrosion inhibitors, certain other categories of chemical compounds which can be added, especially to higher blends of ethanol. And the engines themselves need to be designed in a way where they can, along with these corrosion inhibitor compounds, handle the corrosion properties of the ethanol. And that is where, for very high blends of ethanol like E85 or E100, the ordinary automobile engines will not be able to do the job, and we'll need to invest in what is called as flex vehicles. And in fact, one of the things which I came across was a suggestion or recommendation from the Automobile India Manufacturers Association, SIAM, to Niti Aayog, saying that we should really not think about adoption of E85 or E100 right now in India. The focus should be totally on E20 right now over the next say 8 to 10 years. Ensure that E20 gets available across the country, and then take the learnings which are coming out of the adoption of E10 and E20, see what kind of impact it has. Take a more holistic view, not just in terms of the production facilities or the sustainability impacts, but also the kind of impact it has on the automobile engines, and then take those learnings and use that to design automobile engines of the future, which can manage E85 or E100 blends of ethanol, while also not going up too much on the total cost of ownership, because then that will become a deterrent to the final adoption of the blended gasoline by the consumers.
Okay, thank you. Uh, we have seen in the past that there were experiments and their patents related to petrol from some other from plastic and things like that. So what do you think, will that sustain over a period, and how it is going to add value to the flexible vehicles that we are looking forward to?
Sure. So what we have seen, and I
Before
came
before
across
you
one.
answer, if I can
Sure.
request you to stop sharing so that we can have a wider screen to,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So let me then. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
So is
sharing has
this
not yet stopped.
sharing has not? Is it?
Yeah. Now
Does it
this
stop
is
now?
this is what we will. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So what I saw was, I was reading about on one or two case studies, especially in Thailand, where they had certain impediments. They had planned a lot of bio ethanol to be produced out of Jatropha, which is one of the non-edible seeds, and there have been challenges with the adoption and cultivation of Jatropha. I think at one point of time it was also a path which India was keen to take. But I think with those learnings and the policy incentives, especially the viability gap funding and the tax related incentives, I think the focus has now shifted to 2G, although it will take some time, for 2G plans to come up. So HPCL, I was reading, HPCL has plans of coming out or setting up 4 2G ethanol production units in the near future on its own. And in one case, I think in Trichy, they are planning for a partnership with a private organization and IIT Trichy. So there is a lot of R&D also going on. Lot of private and educational institutions are also coming into the picture. So I think, given the government's focus on this area and given the high reliance of petroleum, which is likely to continue for the transportation sector, I think bioethanol is here to stay. As the Automobile Association is recommending, a more pragmatic view might be to look at E20 E10 followed by E20 with steps of E12 and E15 in between the next 8 years or so to 2030, and then probably start thinking about E85 or E100 and flex vehicles. So right now, I think the focus should be more around E20, continuing E10 in parallel to E20, and making sure that the cost of ownership of these vehicles can be kept to where they are with minimum, appreciation, so that the adoption by the final consumers are not getting hit. And at the same time, I would like to just compare, because there is a lot of talk also about going on about EVs and electric vehicles, which is also one of the focus areas of the government. But we should also keep in mind that EVs themselves have a large battery unit with a lot of metals, lithium, cobalt, steel, etc. So that has a environmental footprint of its own, compared to bioethanol.
Okay, thank you. Acha, I will request Onkar Chavan to unmute himself and ask his question. Onkar?
So my question is, what is more beneficial, ethanol from bamboo or ethanol from sugarcane and other crops, in respect of price, time, and which is more sustainable?
Okay. See, the obviously there are different technologies also available to extract bioethanol from sugarcane. We can have 1G refineries which extracts bioethanol from the raw sugarcane, versus 2G technology, which extracts bioethanol from the sugarcane leftover, this sugarcane bagasse as it is called, after the sugar or the juice has been taken out of the cane, right? So sugarcane, obviously, in terms of production or cultivation in India, is much higher as compared to bamboo. Bamboo, there are certain areas in India which has a lot of presence of bamboo, like Northeast. So the first case study which I discussed was a bamboo-based refinery, which is based in Northeast. So overall, if we talk about the path ahead, then Niti Aayog also in a paper which it published last week is foreseeing sugarcane to be one of the primary feedstocks going forward, right? So, but obviously the focus will be to shift of extraction of bioethanol from raw sugarcane, which is the 1G methodology, to 2G, because we do not want to impact or have any impact from a food security perspective. The one point which has to be kept in mind, though, is the water scarcity, because sugarcane, we know, is a very water intensive crop. So that is where I think we need to be fairly cautious and take some prudent policy steps to see how it does not go beyond a point, and whether certain other feedstocks which would be substitutes to sugarcane, may not be bamboo. I think it will be more of wood or grass or agricultural waste, which is produced much more abundantly in this country versus bamboo. So.
Yeah, thank you. So do you see that there is a chance, like for example, oil producing and exporting countries, they came together to make and the economy and the economic impact on the whole world were experienced. So will something of this sort come up in future, where we will be having these biofuels and some alternative fuel that we are now going to have as a policy as well as opportunity?
Yeah, I think it will be a mix of biofuels and electric vehicles, really, because everything said and done, we cannot totally do away with the oil producing nations of the world, because petroleum, gasoline, diesel is here to stay for the next at least 3-4 decades. So it has to be a mixed approach, where part of the solution comes through adoption of electric vehicles and renewable energy adoption, solar and wind, and part of it will still be running on petrol, but hopefully it will be blended petrol. It will not be raw gasoline. It will probably be E50, 85, which means the reliance that we have on these oil producing nations can be lowered to a large extent.
Yeah. I think Government of India has already declared that within next 6 months we will have flexi vehicles where the different
Yes.
fuels will be, the vehicles will be available. So I'll
Yes.
request Amog, he had some question to unmute himself.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Sir,
Yes.
in GRI reporting and GHG, so what we found that the more focus is given on the net zero,
Mhm.
where the any energy has been produced, the actual source must be, it should not have more emissions, and they are
Right.
actually objecting the refineries of petrol and also the cement kilns also. So,
Mm.
sir, in terms of ethanol refinery, uh, is there any chance to reduce the actual carbon emission by what world is planning by 2050 and by 2070 India is planning
Right.
uh,
So,
per square feet energy per square feet?
sure. So, Amok, I think that's a very good question. So, I think one of the things I was discussing was the carbon neutrality of the different technologies that we have. So, 1G technology, if you look at the traditional edible biomass-based bioethanol production, it is not carbon neutral, right? So, although the burning of blended bioethanol is always welcome, but over its entire lifespan, from cultivation of sugarcane or corn, which is the feedstock, to consumption as bioethanol, it's still carbon positive, right? So it does not contribute to net zero. But
Okay.
2G technologies, where you generate bioethanol from wood or bamboo or agricultural waste, is basically carbon neutral. So you are almost there. You are almost there as in terms of net zero. But the real game changer could be the 3G and 4G technologies, which are still not economically viable. So they are still being, so algae based or pyrolysis based technologies, which are still being researched, and hopefully in the next 5 to 7 or 10 years we'll have those commercially viable, and those technologies are actually carbon neutral. So once those get adopted, then that will be a big fillip to the overall objective of net zero by 2050 or 2070.
So sir, currently I can say that currently only the solar PV, that is the only uh, feasible solution right now. Means even though if we are considering for the ethanol production, that will also account for the carbon emission and will not uh, suffice the actual GHG GRI reporting requirement.
So 2G will suffice. 1G will not directly suffice, or will not be a big boost to the net zero objective.
Okay.
2G will suffice, but again, because of the initial capex requirements, a lot of these bioethanol refineries are 1G technology. So both from a carbon neutrality perspective, as well as from food and water resources being used from that perspective as well, the focus should be on adoption of 2G for the foreseeable future. And then in the coming years, once 3G and 4G technologies become more viable, move from 2G to adoption of 3G and 4G. So that would be the path. But of course, as we stand today, because 1G technology is what is responsible for majority of the bioethanol production, So what you are saying is probably correct, that solar PV compares more favorably versus bioethanol coming out of a 1G refinery. But then if we do not have these 1G refineries producing E10 or E20 vehicles, then the R&D to have those vehicles ready to take E20 or E85 from 2G and going ahead from 3G, 4G is also not there in picture. So these are all steps which will hopefully eventually build towards attaining that objective of net zero by 2070.
Noted, sir. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for input.
Thank you. I'll request Adarshji to ask his question.
Good evening. It's a very good presentation. And one thing I would like to get clarified is that, like, we listen that Praj Industry is one of the company which is very active in ethanol production. And parallelly, we say that refineries are also blending this ethanol with while making the products. So how you compare an industry like Praj Industries with other refineries? What is the scope of other industries coming into that area? Like, is it essential that only refinery can produce and blend it, or ethanol is being promoted to be produced independently?
Sir, I did not get the first part of the question. Which industry are you trying to compare
Praj,
the ethanol against?
PRAJ, Praj Industries is very active in ethanol production.
In the
Okay.
chat box also, he has written the question. Praj Industries has a lot of exposure in ethanol production.
Okay. So I'm not aware of Praj Industries, to be honest. So if sir, if you could explain or elaborate what Praj Industries does,
So,
then maybe I can take a shot at this.
so they are upcoming company that where they are try to produce this ethanol. They source their product and create. They have a lot of tanks and infrastructure they are creating in India, so that they are able to create a lot of ethanol into the market. So they are upcoming company and they are doing it. So my question is only that whether only in India only refineries are doing it, or other companies are also actively pursuing, because now the price which we are finding for fossil fuels is going very high, and
Very high.
naturally in UP and other area where sugar cane and other things are available. So I don't find apart from any industry from refinery, is there any scope for other industry to build up, and how is the capex and other things will be taken care of?
Okay. So what I have seen, sir, is that the production could be, the actual production of the bioethanol could be done by a multitude of companies, small and big. Some of these could be subsidiaries of the public sector OMCs. Some could be private. But the actual mixing of the ethanol with gasoline currently is being done entirely by the OMCs. So primarily the public sector OMCs, IOCL, BPCL, and HPCL, but also to a lesser extent by the other private players, which is also increasing day by day. So when you talk about Reliance and others, they're also taking aggressive steps in this direction. So right now, I think in terms of making bioethanol or bioethanol blended petrol or gasoline available to the end customer, I think it is going to be through the oil marketing companies, whether the PSUs or the private entities. And I have not seen any specific policy directive or any incentive for private companies to get into retailing business. They are there in terms of the production of bioethanol, but they are not really there in terms of the retailing business.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sen, for taking time out and explaining us the opportunities and in defining what will be the scenario of the change environment that we are going to see in near future. And it was I was very happy to know that we are not behind. In fact, we are ahead of the targets and time. So hope that this will create opportunity and the clean environment for all of us in India.
Sure.
Thank you all
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And before we conclude, I'll just take one more minute. I would like to just acknowledge the help I have received from a couple of people in preparing the presentation. One is Shubhajit Ghosh, who has helped me in reviewing and fine-tuning the content. And one of my colleagues, Vignesh, who has also published a paper on this area, and from whose paper I've also borrowed a lot of the material which we saw on the slides. So thanks to Shubhajit Ghosh and Vignesh Manav.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
finally, thanks to all the audiences. I think it was a pleasure, and there were quite a few questions, very pertinent questions which are asked. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to Kavita ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sen. Thank you very much. All of you who have joined today for this very interesting topic that we had discussed today. And we can see the opportunities that are lying ahead of all of us. Many students have joined today. I can see them. And please see the opportunity which is lying ahead of all of us. Please join us on Friday for a session by Mr. Manish Mishra, who will be talking on cloud technology, fueling growth and digital transformation on Friday at 6 o'clock. On 26th, the Bombay Management Association's annual awards function will be telecasted online at 4:30. You are all requested to join for this annual event, which we generally have for felicitating the leaders and the captains of the industry. Do join us on 26th. For last 2 years, since March 2020, we are all meeting online on screen. There is a great opportunity now on 26th, the Sunday, which is going to be Rishi Kumar Pandya's memorial lecture, and Dr. Asit Sen, a practicing psychiatrist, is going to talk on good, bad, and ugly lessons from COVID. I'm sure many of you would like to join. It is in Nehru Center in Worli. Do join us there. In all our WhatsApp groups and in emails. You must have seen the notification. If not, please make the visit to Bombay Management Association's website. There you will find all the details if you are not member. If you are not member and you want to be member of Bombay Management Association, our secretariat is at your service. Please ping us. We will get back to you. And it's not done for this month of March because Mr. Harish Manwani, who was Chief Operating Officer at Hindustan Unilever, is going to talk on leadership, lessons in leadership in a turbulent world under Dr. K.S. Basu Memorial Lecture. This will happen on 29 from 6 o'clock. That time also I request all of you to join. And our monthly feature of celebrating Indian managers who made a difference. This month we are going to have Mr. J.B. D'Souza, IS officer who had made an impact in the environment. And we are remembering him and trying to see how relevant his lessons are in today's time also. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening and do join us on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for the upcoming programs of Bombay Management Association till we say goodbye to March 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.